Hello and welcome to Access Chat. I'm really delighted that we're joined today by Karine Vasselin, who is the Group Head of Inclusive Futures at Capgemini, a French headquartered multinational IT services and transformation company. Sounds a little bit like something I did previously, but they're very different, I swear. And I met Karine first when I was working with the ILO as part of the Global Business and Disability Network, which Deborah's also had some work with. And I've been trying to get you on ever since. And so we're really glad to have you with us today. Karine, can you tell us a little bit about who you are, what Capgemini is, so probably misdescribed, and also a little bit about your role and how you came to be working in the inclusion space?
Yes, thank you so much, Neil, Antonio, and Deborah. Good afternoon to all of you, and really happy to be in this podcast. So, as you said, I'm Karine. I'm a French middle-aged lady, even more the mother of two fantastic children. I'm based in Paris. I've been working for Capgemini for almost 30 years old now. And across this career in the group, I've had several roles from a managing consultant to HR director, and I've joined our group CSR team back in 2021 to be in charge of coordinating across the 50 countries where Capgemini operates our diversity and inclusion agenda. And as you mentioned, yes, Capgemini is a historically a French company. Really, acquisition after acquisition, it has grown up to 420,000 people. And it is active as a multicultural company in close to 55 countries now, which really represents a great challenge, but an exciting experience to drive inclusion in that context.
Yeah. So you're diverse by the very nature of being in 55 countries and having hundreds of thousands of people. But the challenge is, how do you create the inclusivity in the organization? What was it that drew you into the role after doing all of these other roles within CAP?
I think that in this role, I wanted to combine two past experiences, combining business orientation and talent management, because I do see really the added value of inclusion at the intersection of this business and talent, because what we do to develop an inclusive workplace is really important to be in capacity to innovate more with more diverse thinking around the table, to better serve our clients because they are very diverse, and to keep on attracting, growing the best talents wherever they are and whoever they are.
Thank you. Deborah, I had a question.
Yeah, thank you. And Karine, thank you for being on the show today. I'm noticing something being from the United States that I don't know anyway, I'm happy about it because there's nothing I can do about it. But I really appreciate how much Europe is stepping up when it comes to inclusion and accessibility. And some of y'all might notice that my little country is struggling a little with words like DEI and woke. But I'm really excited actually to see Europe standing up and really saying, okay, y'all do whatever y'all want, but we actually really are going to commit to this in ways that I haven't seen before. So I'm actually really, really excited about that, just as an individual that cares about this community. But Karine, I was just wondering, how do you feel it's going? I mean, are you optimistic about what you're seeing come out of your countries and in Europe? And are you a little optimistic? Maybe it's unfair to me to say, but I'm always looking for the optimism. Are you optimistic about what's happening in your own country and in Europe in regards to inclusion?
Honestly, I think that to avoid the negative, the risk of just being another, I would say, wave of management or something fashionable, we always try to position what we were doing on inclusion around the value, as I was mentioning, it brings to our business. So to really consider that this is not something to add extra, but this is something that really is at the core of our future growth. However, we are very conscious of what is happening externally. And to be fair, we made some adjustments in the way we were talking about inclusion, even beyond we had this new US president, because we were receiving feedback from our own employees through our monthly employee survey. They were not against some of that. There is always a small proportion of opponents, but majority of them felt interested. But unfortunately, they were feeling that they were not the target, because they had the impression that our inclusion roadmap and efforts were targeting only minorities. And so if you were not a woman with a disability or from a LGBT plus community, it was not for you. So even starting in 2024, we reposition a bit the narrative to say, on the contrary, I mean, we are trying to build a culture and a workplace which works for everybody. And so we changed our motto to Inclusive Futures for All. Because in fact, people are not defined by just one identity. I mean, you are not just a woman, you are not just having a disability. And this identity evolves along the time with your life, because you can become a parent, a carer, and you can acquire a disability or a condition. And anyway, beyond that, every progress we make in terms of enriched benefits policy, in terms of accessibility, really benefits all in the end and improve the employee overall life experience. And so everybody can find something for them in it.
Wow. I think that is extremely innovative. And it sounds silly to say, oh, well, we all should be included. Well, duh, that's what we've been saying for 12 years. But I think it's a subtle change that's very powerful, Corinne. So thank you. Thank you. I also want to make one smart aleck comment in that one of my team members at Billion Strong, who is a person with a disability, met with major leaders like parliament leaders in their particular country. And the parliament leader, he told him what he did for a living. And he said, Trump hates you. Anyway, so I was like, oh my gosh. Yeah. So thank y'all for caring about this topic.
But if I may, Debra, there's not only, I would say, the geopolitical context, which affect our journey and our audience. I think another thing which is very important and which is growing more and more is the role of AI and how we can ensure that the world we are designing don't exclude a group of people or don't increase the exclusion or limitations that could already happen. And for instance, we are a bit concerned of how it will affect women's representation, because we know that women are less represented in scientific or technical cursuses and roles. But it affects also maybe people from a generational standpoint, because we used to fear that people over 50 non-digital natives may be more affected. But I think that maybe on the contrary, as they have developed more expertise, they could still find a role in addition or in complement of AI when people from the young generation might be confronted to a shortage of entry grade jobs. And so this reflection, I think, will be taking more and more pace, and not only focusing just on the geopolitical context, which is an issue by itself.
So, Corinne, welcome. Nice to have you with us today. Sometimes organizations run this type of programs from the head office, and then people who are in different countries might think, oh, this is something interesting that is happening in our HQ, but how can this impact us? So my question to you is, how can we make sure that this type of initiatives are embraced by all employees, by every CEO in every region? Because you can have this commitment from the head office, but sometimes in other regions, other CEO might, oh, don't take this serious. This is something that they are doing. And then employees might feel disappointed. I really want to onboard this, but my local CEO is not really on it. How can we make sure that actually everyone feels that this is for them?
Yes, it's a fair question that you're asking, Antonio, because yes, we have the chance to have a strong sponsorship from the top head of our company. Our CEO committed himself to strong commitments and international pledges, notably with the valuable 500 and high-low. But it has to be then cascaded with the second level of leadership and proximity managers, which is not so easy because even if they have most of them goodwill or understood that it could be important to maintain the good dynamics of their team, they are so busy with so many business, client, reporting obligations. So to try to equip them, we have embedded, I would say, inclusion modules and trainings in most of our leadership and management trainings. And we have tried to make them interactive, situation-based, and not something that comes from the top as a kind of, religion or a book to learn by heart, but really to see that it is actionable and that it could really help them to better understand the reaction of some of their team members. And for that, we developed a tool which we called inclusion circles. It's semi-guided conversation, so with a kind of a pre-assessment to see where you are as a manager, a toolkit with basic notions, and with a set of scenarios based on the authentic cases that we collected from our employee survey, to be in capacity to discuss as a team what kind of feeling or ideas they have in front of this scenario, and how could they be proactive and give a response as a team. And so following this scenario, how it could be translated into their own team situation. So this is something from the managerial chain with their team. And in parallel of that, something which is really instrumental in the rollout of our inclusion roadmap is the contribution of our employee networks. So we've got across the group more than 100 chapters in total, but 5 main global employee networks like Women at Capgemini, Outfront, Capability, Neuroability, and they are really active all together. First, to offer a safe moment and safe spaces of chat, networking, and if they are okay with it, to work with us on some of initiatives, either internally or externally, to really have a role and a direct contribution in what we do. And sometimes I can say it's a bit challenging because and this is part of their role, and notably for Outfront, they were pretty active and determined in us enriching the safety travel guides, for instance, and make the employee benefits considering all kind of couples and families. So it has tangible impact.
Amazing. Having worked in a federated multinational organization, I know this is not a trivial piece of work. So great stuff you're doing on the sort of hands-on aspect of the training. Another area that I know you've been working on, and you briefly touched on it, was neuro inclusion. And it's an area that I think clearly has gathered momentum over the last 4 or 5 years. But as an observer from the UK, it was an area where France was doing different things and maybe was a little slower to adopt, but now is really active. So, and you've been part of that. So can you tell our audience a bit about the work that you've been doing as part of Manifest Inclusion and the work around neurodiversity particularly?
Yes. So I think that we started early, notably in France, with a program that was called Les Zèbres, because, zebras are a different kind of horses. And the idea was really to work in partnership with governmental and training institutions to onboard in Capgemini France cohorts of interns and really monitor them with managers that were trained to work with neurodivergent people. So that was quite successful. Everybody was very energized and enthusiastic about it. Unfortunately, it was just a pilot because we realized it was raising more difficulties than we anticipated. Because this kind of very positive image associated to neuroinclusion versus disability, by the way. I mean, if I'm being a bit, sometimes we associate talent, innovation, creativity to neuroinclusion, to neurodiversity versus the traditional image of around disability is a bit more negative, a bit more pitiful, something that we want to avoid at all costs. But never mind. So everybody was enthusiastic, but yes, there was really this realization that it's not so easy. I mean, the workplace itself needs to be a bit accommodated to ensure that it is not so noisy, to ensure that the guidelines are very clear how to navigate in the building. The managers really need maybe to have more time and really have sometimes a difficult moment, and so some support to deal with some potential difficulties. So for all this reason, it was not possible to scale really this initiative. So to be honest, we stopped it or we froze it for a certain time. There were another type of pilots running in different countries, notably in Australia, New Zealand, in the US, in the UK. But learning from this first pilot, they decided to go small. So with a limited cohort, to go with an expert. And so they decided to get advice from, for instance, Ambitious about autism or Zavicon, Auticon, so not to be alone. And progressively, and working as a kind of a task force, learning on our respective experience, we were able in 2 years' time, so between 2022 and 2024, really gather a kind of knowledge base, share good practices, develop some trainings and some referentials. And the task force ended with 12 countries, so sharing all of this all together. And we founded our Neuroability Network as a kind of a sub-chapter of our disability network, precisely to learn from our employees who were directly impacted or who were impacted through their family, and so have this grassroots experience and grassroots learning. We decided that we still needed to learn. And so that's why we joined different external coalitions, and notably with 8 other global companies headquartered in France, like Orange, L'Oréal, Pernod Ricard, Siemens, Thales. We decided really to have a regular catch-up, put all together our resources, and try to align on a shared roadmap and shared ambition to progressively and with concrete illustrations in terms of recruitment, career management, to become more neuro-inclusive companies.
Carine, you have mentioned before this, the word we all love, AI. And I'm going to give you a second. I'm going to take my time to ask this so you have a second to catch your breath there. But AI is so important. And thank you for sharing the efforts that y'all did with the neurodiversity, and also that it got very complicated. I myself learned that I was neurodiverse. Everybody else around me knew it, but I learned it in my mid. And it is interesting understanding that you live with ADHD. I know when I was a younger woman, we would use terms like they're AAA personalities. And it's like, I realized AAA personalities mean that, that people like us, people like me and Neil, sorry, Neil, but people like us that we add a lot of value, but, we're also, neurodiverse. But I think it's fascinating that you learned what you learned and you worked with all of the others. And I also appreciate that as a corporation, you looked at it and said, all right, we can continue to go this way, but maybe there's not as much value to everyone. And so let's stop and let's look at it from this perspective. So I appreciate that, because I imagine you got a lot of pushback making that decision. So I just want to say I honor that, so that, because we can keep pushing forward and just doing the same thing. But yeah. So, but I'm fascinated with how it is tying to actually what we all should be saying. Why are you not including any employee? That's ridiculous. At the same time, don't lose the voice of our community, which is really easy to say, oh, we include everybody. And then actually we don't
We include nobody. Yeah.
Right. Which we've been doing that forever. But anyway, I mean, we in the United States, we created the Americans with Disability Act in 1990. That is what, 36 years ago. And yet when you look at our statistics, people with severe disabilities they're more unemployed than ever before. Very, very sad little statistics coming out of my beautiful country. But at the same time, I am hopeful about AI. So how do you use AI, Karine, to help you learn more about neurodiversity, make sure that people with disabilities are included, and embrace the entire workforce? I understand that's a ridiculous question.
No, not at all. Honestly, I may be a bit naive because this is the beginning of AI, but especially for people with disabilities and neurodiversity, I think that really AI is more of a chance than a risk. And statistics show that neurodiverse people, in average, use AI really more frequently than the rest of the population. Because I think that they have realized that this is by nature a kind of an assistive tech, very open to all, very affordable, and very easy to use and to improve. And so for neurodiverse people, I suppose it really can help them in, organizing better their ID, making some synthetic overview after a meeting, or trying really to rephrase and express better what they really meant. And so I think sometimes maybe with the Gen AI help them in performing some tasks like managing their agenda, something like that. It can really be very supportive and very useful. For people with disabilities, I think it's very promising as well, because it's not only AI, it's also all the accessibility efforts that have been developed by tech and software companies, embedding really in their basic version caption, translation, text to speech, and so on, that are really now available for them on demand, and then they could really help them in their daily task. But once again, this is a bit the beginning. This is promising, and I hope this promise will really be concretized, because unfortunately, this is not the only dimension and scope that are at stake when it's about when their inclusion in the workplace is at stake. I mean, AI and tech facilities won't be enough to ensure that people with disability or neurodivergence are really recruited at a fair rhythm and proportion of their skills, that they are not only hired for specific roles and kept left to these limited roles, and can really evolve in the organization as anybody else, with no prejudices or barriers attached to to who they are and to their condition or sometimes difficulties. So and for this, it's more a question of culture, of process, not AI only and tech only won't be enough.
So, Karine, we're about to end our conversation, but I would like to ask you, and based in your experience and considering the current times we're living in, let's say, if you had to advise your younger self who wanted to join organization to work on accessibility and inclusion, what advice would you give that person today?
It's a bit polemic, but I won't recommend to start by this kind of role. I think that to be convincing and to be equipped for this kind of role, you need to have developed some other backgrounds. I think, yes, business background, talent management background are very useful. And on top of that, you must have developed some specific skills that sometimes come with experience, like influential skills, like resilience, like cooperation, coordination, and honestly, starting by this kind of role for your early career, I think it's quite challenging. It might be more easy if you start in the CSR domain, for instance, on the environmental field, because it's a bit more technical, more associated to reporting standards and so on. But for these inclusion topics, which are really connected to the cultural, the values, the managerial mode of your company, I think you need to have built on your personal and professional background to be more impactful and more ready for that.
Thank you. That's a great perspective, and one that I think I could echo, that in order to have the credibility within an organization, you need to understand how the rest of the organization works. So, Karine, it's been a great pleasure to have you with us today. I need to
Pleasure
thank
too.
our friends at Amazon for supporting us and helping keep the show on air. And we look forward to sharing this with the wider community when we put the podcast out shortly.
Thanks so much again for your time and for this invitation.
Our pleasure.